Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second live stream. We are so excited to be joined by some amazing guests this week to talk about the next two chapters in Laudato Si. And our topic this week is integral ecology. Now, just a little bit about our session today. Some of you who might not have tuned in to our first week may be wondering, why does the Indiana Catholic Conference do this kind of session? And so we are trying to reflect and meditate upon church documents because they're the primary source of our advocacy at the State House. These, the works of the Catholic social doctrine, completely inform what we're doing. And so we've invited you along to this journey with us as we pray and reflect on Laudato Si. And so just a couple of little housekeeping things here. You can post your questions in the comments section if you have them. And so I already see a couple coming in, so that's great. But as we're talking here, make sure you're posting your comments and questions in that comment section on Facebook. And we'll try to get to them at the end. And then finally, if you know of people who are unable to make it to this live stream, know that it is being recorded and put on our Facebook page, and in addition on our YouTube page. And we'll go until about 12:45 today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Angela Espada, the Indiana Catholic Conference's Executive Director, and she's going to tell you about our guests, and then one of our guests will do an opening prayer for us.
Welcome back, everyone. We're happy that you could join us again. Today joining us, we have two guests who are very interested in this topic and have been working in this, I can say before, for lack of a better way to say it, before it became fashionable to care about our common home. We have Sister Sheila, and Sister Sheila is a Benedictine nun, and she is also part of the Archdiocese Creation Care Commission, and she can tell you a little bit more about that. And for those of you who follow the Criterion, which is the Catholic newspaper in Indianapolis, she was interviewed prior to Laudato Si week in May, and she talked about how she got started. And one of the things she mentioned was that she had been working with John Mundell of Mundell and Associates, and it's serendipitous that our other guest has also worked with John Mundell because she is his daughter, Sarah Mundell. And Sarah has an interesting background that I wanted to ask her about. She has a master's in global development and social justice. Mm-hmm. And if you only read Laudato Si and saw how corporations might make a decision that might not be in keeping with the environment, you would think that such a master's degree wouldn't be possible. And so she's going to talk to us about that. But first, Sister is going to lead us in prayer.
Thank you. Thank you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Gracious Creator God, we give thanks to you for all the many blessings that you've given us, for our life together, and all the creatures that exist in our life. We continue to ask for your guidance, and we ask to increase our faith and trust in you as we follow your lead in understanding and caring for this creation. And continue to guide us through these conversations and continue the dialogue that Pope Francis has asked us to be about. We ask this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Holy Spirit, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. I'm going to digress just a little bit. We jumped in last week talking about Laudato Si, but for those of you who aren't familiar with where the title comes from, thought we'd go back to that. And Laudato Si is actually taken from a prayer that St. Francis did. And Laudato Si literally means praise be to you. And the beginning of the prayer says, "Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister and Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs." And so knowing that Laudato Si comes from that can kind of set the foundation for the conversations and really the whole encyclical. Correct? Last week, we didn't really ask the Archbishop, if for those of you who were able to see it, and if you haven't, you can go on Facebook and view it at your leisure, or Dr. Sakamoto, how they got involved, because we would think the Archbishop would fall in line with what the Pope has said, especially through something as important as an encyclical. How did you get involved, Sister Sheila, with caring for creation?
Well, it's my upbringing, really. I come from a family of people who really cared for the earth. My grandfather, was outside quite often. He was something that he loved to do. He was a Boy Scout master. And as his grandchildren, he just took us outside. And my mother the same way. We just did many things. When we take a walk, we pick up litter, just little things that we were taught as children. And so I can say that I think all of my brothers and myself all feel that way. We all want to care. And I think we extend that to caring for each other as well. So I have to, go back to my parents and grandparents.
Okay. What about you, Sarah? How did you get involved and then decide to pursue higher education in that area?
Right. Same thing, actually, with my family. Growing up with two parents who are committed to protecting the environment. Even, my dad was involved in student groups that were talking about divestment when he was in college. And, we'd celebrate Earth Day, walk down the street and pick up trash. And, I was growing up, the early 90s, we were talking about reduce, reuse, recycle at school a lot. And I was also in Girl Scouts. But I think it's that love of nature. I always loved animals and how, the animals and plants and how they support our life. And even that sense of, learning about the origin stories in the story of Genesis. And when I was little, watching those, videos about the creation story and just kind of being in awe that this is a gift that we receive from God and we need to take care of it. So I pursued a master's, really, because I had done my undergrad in English and journalism and was always very interested in communicating how do we implement our faith life into the different aspects of our social living. And I was very interested in what's that relationship like between developing and developed countries, and what does gospel love mean when you're talking about access to education, when you're talking about, what's the impact of our economic life on the environment, on healthcare, on women's health, and how does the church's social teaching guide us in those areas? What does it mean to put the dignity of the human person first? And so.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Sister Sheila, you said something important about, caring for the earth and then caring for other people. When I was going back to St. Francis's prayer, he points out that the earth actually cares for us. And I thought about that the way a parent cares for us, and then when we're younger, and then as they need our help as we progress, then we care for them. So it's reciprocal. And I think, unfortunately, we've gotten into this mindset that we forget that the earth cares for us and that it's just something to be used. And if we looked at it more like a relationship, and similar to the way that we have relationships with people that we care about, people that we love, and we should care about all people. But if we looked at it more as a relationship instead of a commodity, and remember that the reason that we can actually care for it is that it was this gift that cared for us first.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. That leads me to our first question, and I'm going to start off with you, Sister Sheila.
Okay.
In the first two chapters, Laudato Si talks about dominion. Dominion over the universe should be understood more properly in the sense of responsible stewardship. And how have we interpreted the dominion mandate in the book of Genesis? Properly, improperly? How would you reflect on that?
Oh, okay. Well, I, to me, the place to start is with relationships, as you said. I noticed that in reading the encyclical, that word is used a lot, and I actually did a word count, and it's 62 times. So it's a theme that runs strongly through the encyclical. And
As opposed to dominion.
as opposed to dominion, absolutely. Actually, you're absolutely right. And one of the quotes from the encyclical that jumps out at me is that Pope Francis says that human beings are grounded in three fundamentally intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth. And goes on to quote the Catechism, which is a beautiful quote that says that God wills the interdependence of all creators, all creation, and that they complete each other and serve each other. So that speaks exactly what you're saying. And so when we think of this, intertwining of relationships and how we care for the earth cares for us. We care for neighbors, and neighbors care for us. God cares for all of us, and we co-create with God. The concept of dominion doesn't fit in that model. And the one time I think that Pope Francis does mention dominion, he says we must forcefully reject the notion that we have absolute dominion over all creatures, because it puts us in this space of not co-creating or cooperating with God, but taking God's place, because we're extracting and we're creating a confrontational relationship instead of a caring relationship.
That makes me think of when people think about dominion, they think of dominion over not only the earth, but themselves. Mm-hmm. And that leads to people saying, I can do whatever I want with my body, be it in respect to abortion or this most common issue, vaccinations, because I only have to care about myself. And just before I came in, I saw a message that was put out by the Pope and the bishops in South America and Latin America, where they talk about that getting a vaccine is an act of love. Mm-hmm. It's an act of love to show for yourself, for other people. And even if it's a small gesture, all gestures of love are good. Mm-hmm. And so if we reject this dominion and only looking at I and see the bigger picture, not only as it relates to the environment, but for the common good, and then, in instances like today, the common good as far as good public and social health, that can take us a long way. Yeah. Would you like to give your thoughts about dominion versus stewardship?
I think, not to repeat what Sister Sheila already said, I'm struck by the difference between a ruler and conqueror, and then God fulfills, what does it mean to be a ruler or a guide in the life of Jesus? And it was service and self-sacrifice. But, and so what's that mean to me as a steward? How to... Pope Francis quotes, that we're supposed to till and keep the earth. So that means work it, plow, give our effort, but then care for it and protect it and make sure that it continues into the future. It kind of, what's it going to take to make sure that there's enough resources for everyone? Just because I can use them, should I? That part of that thinking of self-sacrifice, am I willing to kind of deny myself in a way? But when a mother takes food from her own plate to put it on her child's plate, she doesn't think of it as self-denial. She thinks of it as love, because she wouldn't think twice, right? And so in the smallest actions, from getting a vaccine, or do I turn off the water when I'm brushing my teeth, or turn off the lights, suddenly that becomes something beautiful, and that makes me happy because it's an opportunity to love my neighbor.
Well, and you brought up an important point about doing something today for the future. We take care of the land so that we can pass it on, because first of all, it wasn't ours to possess, and there are a lot of indigenous communities that realized that early on, before outsiders came in and disrupted that notion. But if we love our children and our children's children, and if we could be around for our children's 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 children, wouldn't we want them to be able to enjoy fresh air, clean water, open spaces where they could be out and enjoy nature? And I think if more people thought about, I love my children and my grandchildren, or my nieces and my nephews, and even the people that I don't know, but I think they should be able to enjoy these things, maybe they wouldn't look at it as sacrifice. Like you said, it would be like, that mother who, even if it's not as extreme as taking food off her plate, but, for those who have plenty, it's the last scoop of ice cream. And the kid looks at it and mom's like, okay, here. If they looked at it as we need to share, then it would be different. I'm going to start with you, Sarah, with this next question. In chapter 3, the Holy Father notes that a culture of relativism is at the root of the exploitation of human beings and the degradation of environment. And he also links the destruction of human life and with human trafficking and drug trade and other issues to prevailing use and throwaway culture and logic. What does the church offer in response to a culture of relativism and a throwaway culture? And how, as we as people of faith, can relate to that?
Well, relativism is there's no more right or wrong, right? Your truth, you can keep your truth, I'll keep mine, I respect yours, but I'm not going to impose mine. And we know that God is our creator, he is the source of truth, and so we do have a point of reference that we can base all of our actions and decisions on how we would like to live in life. I think really the church's way of addressing that, and then the throwaway culture is kind of looking at objects and people as something disposable. It's if you're helping me, if you're good for my project that I want to work on, if it, it's very self-centered. And so really it's going back to that message from Genesis of restoring the relationships. The gospel message tells us how to interact with our neighbor. It tells us the dignity that each person has because they're a child of God. And that changes the way that I interact with them because I'm a child of God and you're a child of God. So, I want to take care of your neighborhood's air pollution the same way that I would take care of my neighborhood's air pollution, or the flooding in your state is my own. It helps build that empathy. And so it's really, seeing one another with these new eyes in the light of the gospel.
Did you want to comment on that, sister?
Well, that was beautiful. I think description from Scripture and what we can learn. I also I feel like the Archbishop did a beautiful job last week, bringing some of the aspects of our church tradition, particularly Catholic social teaching, and we have such a rich treasure to offer in our history and our traditions and our teachings, and so when we look at dignity of life, dignity of the worker, rights and responsibilities. Can't have one without the other. They go together. Obviously care for creation is one of the tenets. But one that jumped out at me when I thought of this question was the call to family, community, and participation. It reminded me of, in our formation as religious, one of the courses we took was by a Marist brother who was a psychologist, and he said, as parents, one of the things that a child learns is to learn a sense of boundaries and limits, and one of the parents' challenges is to be able to teach that and really extend it to the community, because it's the extended family and the community that helps to teach that. And if that doesn't happen, it allows for discrepancy and distortion, and it can create violence, it can create suicidal thoughts and just a lot of issues. And I see our culture does not support that. I see our culture says everything is limitless. And so the challenge that, families have to help teach those when the culture is teaching something else. I find that, that part of the Catholic social teaching can really help us, I think, with that relativism that we're seeing in our world today. And then, on a more ritual standpoint, our sacraments have so much to offer us as well. I mean, especially Eucharist. Pope Francis says it embraces and penetrates creation, and it just leads us to care for creation. So, I mean, it's rich. Our church teachings and practices are so rich.
One of the things that Sarah said about a throwaway culture, and then also you with the respecting the dignity of life. I wonder also with relativism and I could have my truth, you can have your truth, but then also against the backdrop of technology and how technology can separate us. Technology, of course, can help us, but it's also technology, and some people use interchangeably, progress that has made a lot of problems for the environment. And so what would you say to people who only want to look at the benefits of technology and the benefits of progress, or say, well, if you tear down a few trees or muddy the waters or pollute the waters or the air, well, we need progress and we need technology. And if that technology separates me from my community, well, that's okay because I have myself and my family. How do we get away from that type of phenomena that seems to be so prevalent? I know it's a
challenge.
Yeah, big question. It probably doesn't have an easy answer.
No,
and maybe part of the answer is just being aware
Yes.
that it's, while there's a truth, it doesn't have to be a dichotomy that one is good and one is bad.
Right.
That, progress is good, so if something is, given up, then that's okay. That we have to be more nuanced.
Right. And I also feel that first prayer, we want to always not judge. If somebody has maybe that mindset to bring it to prayer, and also to bring it to dialogue. It's not. What I find is the person will make their choice, and I can't control that, but I can offer my perspective, and if the person's willing to listen, we can dialogue, and over time, hopefully, come to a better solution for everybody. So it takes time, it takes patience, and it takes an awful lot of courage. But that's what we and I think that's what Pope is calling us to do.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people are unaware because we do have these distances that are created either in our own communities or because of technology, not knowing that, the progress that they so love may have in another community created, dirty water or, asthma patients for the next 2 generations. And so education in a way that's not beating them over the head and preaching to them and calling them bad people, but trying to create a level of awareness, along with prayer, that they could see and be open to seeing. Years ago, and I think I mentioned this when we were doing our Faithful Citizenship webinars, I met a priest who was a preacher and a priest, actually. They both had gone to Massachusetts to train with Dr. Martin Luther King against, nonviolent, social resistance. And, after several days, and Dr. King was getting calls about the various bombings that were going on in Birmingham, and asked him, how do you keep going, and how do you just not steel yourself and just become callous. And he said he constantly prayed that hearts of stone would be turned to hearts of flesh so that they could feel and have compassion for the people, in this case back then, the people that they hated without even knowing. And so I think, as we stay prayerful, that we pray that, hearts of stone to be turned hearts of flesh, and that minds that are closed would become open to, to seeing that people live a different way, that we all need to share, that we need to do something so that we have a planet to pass on. Going back to another question, why is labor, work, an important feature of the Pope's analysis of the disconnect between humans and creation? I'll let whoever wants to start.
Should I
start?
Sure.
Well, first of all, from the beginning, God told us to till and keep the earth. So it's part of our vocation as human beings to work. St. Joseph was a carpenter. He had a profession, and that's the way he, followed God's will for him. And work is this opportunity for us to restore this relationship with nature, because in offering people employment, then you give them a pathway to be self-sufficient and cover the expenses the things that they need to provide for their family. And work is the place where the fullest human dignity can be expressed in growing in knowledge and using your creativity and contributing to your society.
I was going to say too, also with work, as it relates to the environment, it doesn't always have to be like tilling the land. When I was reading Laudato Si, and it talked about how some communities become compromised or even stripped of their value because of progress. I remember thinking about the neighborhood that I lived in, predominantly African American, middle class, but predominantly African American. Highway came through it. There were family-owned businesses. There were families who had a couple of acres attached to their houses where they always had gardens in the summer. All of those went away. And back then, people trying to apply for jobs when they had only been their own employers, it was very difficult for them to maintain the quality of life that they had had. As business owners now, being domestics or bus drivers because they didn't have experience other than their business, which people weren't hiring them to run other businesses. And so they were deprived, because of progress, of their labor, sometimes in the field with their gardens, but their labor from their businesses that they had owned because of progress.
You see that too in kind of as manufacturing becomes bigger and bigger, that you lose that personal touch. Small farmers or a family-owned, like you're talking about, these family-owned stores, not only impact the life of the people that are working there, but also, in order to produce at such large levels, it often depletes more resources or uses more harmful chemicals. And yes, it's economically advantageous, but what's our goal? Is it to be the most economically advantageous business, or are we trying to offer a place where our community can contribute things to one another?
This next question is for you, Sister Sheila, so we don't have to guess who's going to answer. Pope Francis links the destruction of culture to environmental destruction. How does the environment affect our culture?
And I really, some of the examples that you gave, the example that you gave with your neighborhood is an excellent one. In chapter 4, Integral Ecology, he speaks, Pope Francis speaks of different types of ecologies: daily ecology, social ecology, environmental ecology. So he starts to really weave all aspects of our culture with with what we think of as environment. And so we use the environment in a broader term, like an urban environment, a rural environment. So when we think of it in all those different concepts, it's, I think it becomes easier to see how the interactions become so intertwined and how they impact each other. And in our world today, I just look at different countries and different cultures. I look at the people of Haiti and how well are they able to live their daily lives right now. It's such a tragedy. And the people of Afghanistan. And you listen to the stories of people that are leaving their countries, from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. And so many, they say we leave out of desperation because we can't live our life, we don't have our livelihood, whether the crops are failing or there's corruption. But all of those things all play a role in allowing us to be able to live our culture. And we hang on to it. So I read an article about how refugees would keep their practices and their prayer life and their recipes. They bring them with them because it's what they hold so dear. And so, to disrupt that, sometimes our environment becomes so disordered that it disrupts our culture. And I think in our own country, I think of the expansion westward when we think of how things have progressed. And we think of technology today, but even as we expanded west as a country, how we took lands from our Native American people, and not only took lands, but we took their way of life and their sacredness, the sacred lands and rituals. So, and it's a loss. It's a loss not just for the people involved, especially the indigenous people who are so close to the land, but it's a loss for us as well, because we need them, because they share with us perspectives that we need to hear to help us become more aware.
I don't think, I know that in the past, people didn't see it that way, which is why some of the atrocities that happened were able to occur. Hopefully, we turned a corner, and that people will be more mindful going forward in the future. Pope Francis critiques the tendency to justify sins against human life in the name of preserving the environment. How might the messages within Laudato Si unite the Church in defense of human life and care for creation?
I think it goes back to that idea that everything is connected. They're not two separate issues. They're two parts of the same issue of preserving human life. He says we can't be environmentalists who are so worried about saving the planet that we think that population control is the answer, or that abortion is justified, or limiting the number of kids people have. That's never right in any situation. And at the same time, he also says that our care for creation is an essential part of our defending human life. Because if you think of a community where there are communities in Indiana where there's spikes of cases of childhood cancer and fatal childhood cancer because the water is contaminated. And it's contaminated because there were businesses that decades ago didn't dispose of their chemical waste properly, or maybe the standards weren't in place, or they weren't being followed correctly. So it seeped into the ground and then into the groundwater. And so there might be mothers in that community that didn't decide to have abortions, but their children were still impacted, and some of their children died because of the lack of environmental care. And
that goes directly back to respecting the dignity of life.
Yes.
Because if the people who made decisions, usually those who are higher up, in business, social, economically, if they lived in those communities where, the seepage or the ash was going into the air, it wouldn't happen. But because they don't have regard for all life, and I don't mean that they callously sit around and say, well, we don't care about them, although there have been documents that show that in some companies that did happen, but that there's just they're oblivious to people outside of themselves when that happens, unfortunately. What made me, when you were talking about that made me, when you talked about population control, like, oh, that'll never happen. And it made me think of, the last Marvel Avengers movie, the Infinity War. For those who don't follow, Marvel, I do. One of my foster kids, I got into X-Men and the Avengers and all of that, and continued to be fascinated by them. But the premise of the story is that the bad guy, and some people didn't look at him as the bad guy, he realized that the planet was in dire state, and he came from another universe to help Earth. And the way that he was going to help Earth was to eliminate, and he did eliminate, a good portion of the population. And while people are like, oh, maybe we do need a restart, or that's a horrible thing and he was the bad guy, the premise is actually sound. If we continue going the way we're going, the planet will not be able to sustain us. And so, what do we do about that? And what do we do, and how do we do it in a way that takes into consideration the most vulnerable? Because, some people have suggested that maybe the billionaires who were racing to get off Earth and get there first is because they know something that we don't know, although we all know the planet's in dire straits. Maybe they're trying to get to the next planet because they've given up on this one. So what is it that we do together with all of us in mind and not leaving anybody behind because they live in a different zip code, or they don't look like us, they don't speak the language that we speak, they don't eat the food that we eat? How do we move forward so that this planet can sustain us all in the future? I'll ask you this question, sister.
Okay.
How has scarcity, desperation, and fear been used to rationalize the practices and principles around caring for our common home?
I do feel that sometimes the messaging is stark, and and sometimes I think it becomes off-putting. So when we hear, and we hear, every time we have a bad rainstorm, climate change, or unusual weather, the heat that we've had, and although it certainly can be related to the things that we're doing, I do believe that for people it tends to tune them out and say, I don't want to hear it anymore. So I do feel that sense of urgency is important, but at the same time balancing it with really love and respect and understanding where people are coming from. I think it's important for us to listen, really to listen to each other. Benedictine, and the first words of the rule of St. Benedict are listen with the ear of your heart. And so to really hear where people are at with this, and not to do so much scaring and fear. Jesus says, do not fear, but to really begin to listen to each other and do the hard work that it takes to work together.
Yeah, to reject the politics of fear.
Right, exactly.
Years ago, my grandmother told me that fear and faith can't reside in the same place. And so I think people need to have more faith that if we work together, we can, care for our common home. And something that struck me as I was reading is, and I might do a word search like you did, on common home. Because if we just say our planet, my planet,
right,
I think that instills in us this ownership that we really don't have. But if we keep focusing on our common home instead of my planet, my home, then that can kind of start us down that pathway where we can start working together. I'm going to ask you kind of a personal question, both of you. Not too personal, but just how are you personally trying to live out the challenges of Laudato Si in your daily life and as you work?
Okay.
You want to start,
Go
Sarah?
ahead. Go ahead.
first of all, if we list all the challenges we've been talking about during these last in this session, you can feel a little bit overwhelmed. So I think for me, one of the first things is really to, keep in mind, what does love of neighbor ask me to do in this moment? Which of those challenges can I do something about right now? Or what does that person in front of me need right now? Or that situation need from me right now? And that action will impact everything else kind of in this ripple effect. But personally, in my daily life, I try to take some of those actions that we hear about, conserving energy and water, avoiding throwing things out by trying to reuse them or repurpose them, buying secondhand first if I can before I buy something that's new, things like this. Look to see the options that I might have. Can I get renewable energy? What would it take to get me there? Asking those kind of questions and seeking resources in the communities also, that knowing that energy companies often will pick up your old refrigerator for free and maybe even pay you for it so that they can recycle the harmful gases that are in that tube and put that into something else. But those are kind of Band-Aid solutions. Really, Pope Francis talks about this integral ecology and an ecological conversion of how am I going to be different? And I think that time, restoring our personal relationship with God is also important, because then that puts me in that right place in relationship with my neighbor. In what does love mean if I'm being asked, what should our car emission standards be? Who does that impact? How can I learn about that?
Not Band-Aids, small gestures.
Small gestures, thank you. They're not Band-Aids. They're
gestures.
Because all the small gestures fill our day with
That's right.
Exactly.
responses.
That's right.
What about you, Sister Sheila?
Well, I go back to the relationships between us, with God, with neighbor, and with the earth. And so I want to listen to God in prayer, listen to our neighbors, especially those most impacted, the most vulnerable. Listen to the stories, and listen to the cry of the earth. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux said, "The trees and the stones will teach you what you'll never learn from the master." So we have much to learn from the earth as well, and listening to the earth. So to be open and receive what these interdependent relationships have to teach me and to help direct me into what am I to be about and what am I to do in my daily life. And I agree, our daily gestures, our daily decisions, we make hundreds of them every day, to include God, include our neighbor, and include the earth in the decision, not just what's best for me, but what's best for others and what's best for the earth and what's God calling me to do.
Can I ask you a question there? How did you come to that? Did you have to be thoughtful about it? Because so often when we go through our daily life, we're on autopilot.
We are.
And that, for me, speaking for myself, to make a decision, I would have to slow myself down. God, neighbor, planet. And so, do you have any suggestions on how we can take a step back and not be on autopilot so that we can be a little more reflexive before we make decisions?
Those are great. That's a great question. And fortunately, as a Benedictine, we have time in our day for personal prayer. And so, as part of that, it's our prayer of the day and how we, what actions, what people I'm going to interact with, what decisions that we'll be making. So I ask for the awareness and the guidance. So that's a starting point. For me, it's a growing discipline and a growing awareness. I think, learning is important to understand how much of an impact this is going to make if I, take the time to recycle, or if we're using paper instead of, regular plates. How to come to those, considerations. And so, as I think I can't say that I can every day make the best decision, but if I can make one decision that has been different, then I think you build upon it and you grow.
Excuse me.
So I think it's a gradual growing, and I think it's true whether we're changing habits of any kind. You know, you say I'm committing myself to making this change in my habit, and then from that point maybe a new habit. And I actually our Lenten practices is a great example of how we can do that. You know, you give something up, but you're giving it up and you're also doing a charitable work, and you know, ours is, you know, also prayer, charity, and abstinence. So I try to combine the three. If I'm giving something up, pray for the, you know, person that might be impacted. You know, if it's one year I gave up meat, and so, you know, pray for all those that are impacted because of the processing meat. You know, the people that are involved in it. You know, it can be a very difficult task. So, as an example, so, you know, I think it's just it just becomes a continual habit.
I've heard that it takes 21 days to develop a habit, which is one of the reasons why, and I heard this after Starbucks was offering free coffee for 21 days. So kind of like a benevolent drug dealer. You know,
That's
so
exactly
you're
right.
free,
That's exactly
and then
right.
you're hooked. And so maybe even, you know, marking your calendar for 21 days and trying to at least once a day.
That's right.
You know, be thoughtful in your decision making.
That's right. Do one thing.
I'm
Or
gonna
set
try
a
that.
timer on your watch or on your phone that reminds you
That's right.
at the end of your lunch, take 5 minutes or something like
That's
that.
right. That's right.
Yeah, use that technology for good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Last question I'm going to ask, and then if we have any questions from people who've been viewing. What do you imagine our community would look like if we were truly caring for our common home?
I would see a community that is more intentional, less rushed about our decisions, and coming together to talk about the advances we want to make as a community. How do we face certain problems, but also what challenges is your neighborhood facing or your part of the city, and basing our public decisions and our public policies on what is really for the common good, and finding a way to kind of make that our guiding point. It's a challenge, but also, I think, a good one. And oftentimes it puts you also have to be willing to face what's uncomfortable and new to you, because it will take us going out of our routine and our life in order to kind of have a bigger vision. Yeah, it's hard. Where everyone's doing these small things every day, encouraging each other to do it.
And you've both told us how, you know, you try to live out Laudato Si. Do you have some suggestions for people who might be listening or viewing?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the Creation Commission.
Yes. I mean, there's any numerous lists of suggestions on what to do as in your daily life. I think there's a lot of information out there online, and both Sarah and I are part of the Creation Care Commission in the Archdiocese. So if people want to, you know, learn more about what we are doing, our website is ourcommonhome.org. It has a wealth of resources, and really over the past 7 years, we have really tried to spread the word across the Archdiocese, to bring this into people's lives and to help parishes, you know, whether it's energy efficiency in their buildings or to start a creation care team in the parish. So there's just so many things to be done, and we can't, as a group, do it all. But we want to build that network and be able to share across parishes, across individuals, across dioceses, absolutely, to really buoy this up and to learn. I think another thing too, the work that you and Alexander are doing in the Indiana Catholic Conference you're leading us and helping us to be more, to really raise our voices in helping with state legislation and, you know, even local legislation as well. So I think following that and, you know, taking the courage to talk to our legislatures, our representatives and senators about some of the topics that come up and learn some of the things that have coming up in the state legislature. So there's so many opportunities, really. There's so many opportunities.
And another one of those opportunities coming up is the season of creation. It will be in September, and in these days, the Commission is getting ready to send out a toolkit, and we're trying to spread that as far and wide as we can. And it's giving lists of ideas with links to resources for how do we live the season of creation at church, at home, at school, in the youth group, and you know, start with pray and act and learn.
That's
you
right.
know?
How can someone get a toolkit?
Well, that's a great question.
Yes.
We can probably post that up. I'm sure it will be on the ourcommonhome.org website, and we can post it on. There is a Facebook page of Archdiocese of Indianapolis Creation Care Commission.
Yes.
And we could put it on
And
our
we can, yes,
Yeah,
we'll share that with
absolutely.
you.
Facebook page.
We are
Awesome.
trying to get it to all of the parishes, religious education directors,
Right.
church secretaries. So if they haven't received it, have them reach out to us and ask for it.
Absolutely. And if anybody's interested in getting on the email list,
Yes.
just go to ourcommonhome.org, and there's an opportunity to stay engaged and to receive some of these periodically.
And as always, when there are issues that are either at the federal or the state level that deal with the environment, to sign up for ICANN updates and reports so that we can send out action alerts so that your voice can be added to ours when we talk to lawmakers of either for legislation that we are opposed to or legislation that we're in support of.
That's right, absolutely.
Well,
And also, you know, is equally as exciting, probably very exciting, is the work of the Vatican in creating the Laudato Si action platform. I know it was mentioned last week, but again, bring it up. That if we truly can bring Catholics from all over the world together to be a part of this, I think we can get to the point of that last question. You know, we can move towards that. We are creating a space where we're all caring for our common home. So we encourage you to. The one website that's excellent is godsplanet.us. So it's the Catholic Climate Covenant. It's a national website. It's a very good website that will keep you engaged on the Laudato Si action platform as it begins to be enrolled.
and we'll put that information on our Facebook page as well. Were there any questions that we didn't reach? Okay. Well, thank you again for being our guest. We really appreciate the work that you're doing and your dedication and your commitment. And
Thank you.
And thank you too.
Yes, thanks for all you do.
Yes.
Great, so I'm just going to wrap us up here. Wow, that was incredible to have Sister Sheila and Sarah and Angela all reflecting on these amazing questions that we find in Laudato Si. I do want to apologize. I know we lost some of our live viewers when our connection disconnected. And so now we have 2 separate live videos on our Facebook page, but our hope is to have this on YouTube as one unified video for people to watch in the future. So if you're still on with us on Facebook, take a look at our YouTube page for that, or you can watch this 2 separate videos on our Facebook page. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next week for our session with Father Terry Ehrman. That's next Thursday, same time, here on our Facebook page. Thank you so much. God bless.